Hello, good morning. Welcome to this last day of the EUROCONTROL-ENAIRE Human Factor Days. Today we're closing this fantastic seminar. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you for the great interest in human factors. Today we're starting. We're glad to have with us on board to Nathan Bink. I'm going to introduce Nathan. He's going to speak about human performance, and as long as the session continues, you may include your questions in the question and answers panel, and at the end of the session, to allow Nathan to continue on the straight, we will make that questions to Nathan. So I'm going to start saying that Nathan Bink was born in New Zealand to Dutch parents. He grew up in Singapore. After finishing his high school, he returned to New Zealand and joined the Royal New Zealand Navy. His career there took him around the world several times as an operator, navigating, and later commanding warships. Highlights included hunting parrots in Somalia and taking a ship to Antarctica. Through his naval career, Nathan became increasingly interested in human factors, human performance, especially for people in stressful and fatiguing situations. So after 10 years in the military, Nathan moved to Maastricht in the Netherlands, where he specialized further in academic studies in cognitive and clinical psychology, as well as teaching psychology at the university. He then took up a position at NATS in the UK as a senior human factors specialist. This allowed him to fully develop breadth of knowledge in human factors, and saw him lead research and development in CESAR projects, as well as contribute to designing several new major tools, including the new NUTS iTech HMI. After 4 years at NUTS, Nathan moved to EUROCONTROL in Vienna to become head of human performance, where he has been for the last 2 years. At EUROCONTROL, Nathan oversees a human performance team and has established a new strategy and policy, as well as continuing his research into cognitive decision-making, human error and analysis, and his passion, confidence, and resilience. Through the last year, Nathan has conducted several large and interesting studies looking at the effect of COVID and human performance in ATM, and believes that a return to normal might not be the best thing when we can do better and look farther. This is what he's here to talk about this morning. So Nathan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lupe. I'm going to share my screen, so I need you to confirm you
No problem.
see it.
In the meantime, I will just remind the audience that you can use the chat to say hi and to raise some comments and to prove that they are really human beings behind the screen. And you can include, again, I would say that, the questions in the question and answers panel. And if you're ready, Nathan, now the floor is again yours.
Great. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Normally, I would be saying good morning from Vienna. However, I'm actually in Mallorca today. It's nice to be in Spain, actually, for this presentation to the ENAIRE Human Factors Week, and also as part of the EUROCONTROL Human Factors work. It's a real privilege, actually, to be here as part of this in what I think is a very, very important time for our discipline, for our area. And I'm hoping this morning actually to take you through a lot of different stuff and to get you to think about things in a bit of a different way. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start by thinking about everything you've done this week. So I'm going to be talking about returning to normal. That was the topic of the presentation that I proposed to Lupe. Except that what I think I want to really get through to a lot of you, and I'm sure that most of you here probably will already partly agree with me, the question of what normal is and what it should look like and whether we should really go back to normal is a really big question for us as human factors specialists. So we're going to really look closely at whether it's even a good idea to go back to normal. And I will take you through a lot of research and a lot of different types of ideas, but the ultimate goal this morning is actually to make you think differently about how you and your organization think about and deliver human factors. And as I was going through the program of this week, I was looking at everything that you've covered, from Work as Done and Work as Imagined on Monday with Steve Shorrock, and all the way through all the science, human error, cognitive science, stress, fatigue, and human capabilities. Well, I want to put it all together this morning, and give you a new perspective. So I'm going to start actually with something that I've started with quite often when I speak, but hopefully lots of you have not heard my sort of spin on this. I like to ask people, and obviously if we were all in the room together, I would be able to ask you in person, but I usually like to start by saying, what is this picture? And most people would say it's a picture of a black hole. In actual fact, it's the first digital picture of a black hole that we've ever captured. And you might be wondering, what on earth does this have to do with human factors or anything like that? Well, I would like to start by offering two kinds of ideas that this picture can help us think about. The first is the way it was built. So when we use a digital camera, like on our phones, we turn the light into a set of digital code, And that digital code can then be reproduced, saved as little files, sent around the world through WhatsApp, through Facebook. All our friends can see it and things like that. Well, how do you do that for a black hole? Well, you need to capture enough light and turn that into digital data. So this was made by up to, I believe, 14 satellites around the world, all pointing at the same place in the universe for a whole week. And then all of that information was put together and it rendered this picture. There was an artificial intelligence aspect of this too, because the amount of light captured to build this image was actually relative to the size of the black hole, a very, very, very small amount of data. And so the artificial intelligence was able to actually recreate and rebuild this picture. Now, what I would normally like to do is to take you through how all of this is done, but I'm going to skip ahead to why this is important for human factors, because what we're going to be talking about and looking at this morning is how can we use all of the knowledge that we have about humans, about brains, about minds, as well as the available technology and data to try and understand our minds better and get this into the way we work a lot easier. But I told you there was two things about this black hole. The second is a bit of a metaphor. So if the first is about using big data and artificial intelligence to infer and understand what's going on in the world, the other part of this is a metaphor. To me, the black hole does represent the brain. And if you think about the brain as a black hole, which is both funny but also seemingly apt, how much do we really know about everyone's neurons and what they're doing and what's going to trigger them, what's going to make them fire? And can we ever really be sure and predict with accuracy what an individual is going to do? I would say we're not quite there yet. But the question for us as aviation specialists or anyone in transport industry is actually, do we need to necessarily know that much? Do we need to understand and predict every micro neuron transmission, etc.? Or is it actually just enough to understand the information that the brain is giving out and what we can do with that? And this is where the light, the halo around that black hole becomes the second part of my metaphor. So we've got here less than 1% of the data available coming from the black hole. Using AI, they can render a picture, a digital image of that black hole. And I want to argue to you that with just the smallest amount of data, but a better way of looking at it, we can actually begin to know what that black hole, our brains, is starting to show, and how we can use that to better and more safely and efficiently run our aviation systems. So bear with me, it will become a bit more clear as we go. This morning, we're going to talk about two main parts. So I'm going to cover some data which I have presented to ENAIRE about 6 months ago, but I have a lot more to add. And I want to talk about the not so secret dangers to human performance as a result of COVID period. So I want to look back over the last year and a half and show you what we did at EUROCONTROL and in other countries in Europe to look at what happened when the traffic disappeared. And I'll come on to that question in just a moment. I then want to sort of go on to why this sets the stage for talking about normal, returning to normal, and also what it means for our future as far as human performance and human factors is concerned. And then I'm going to come on to the second part of my discussion this morning, which is about the future of human performance in ATM. And this is where all of those topics that you've covered this week, I want to sort of bring together and present how we at EUROCONTROL are trying to do it, and maybe as a blueprint or strategy for how you might like to do it. I've already mentioned an example of data gathering with the black hole, but I'll show you a little bit more about what we are doing and what is possible. And then I really want to come on, as Lupe said very nicely, to my sort of favorite topic, which is about well-being. and how confidence, resilience, adaptability, and all of these topics really have a more important role for us going forward. And then I'll leave you with a few thoughts about how we can maintain well-being every day. So before I carry on, I always like to start with this, and I think I started with it last time. Lupe will probably nod if I could see her, which is, what do we mean, or at least what do I mean by human performance? At EUROCONTROL, we take this human performance mountain, this triangle, which you can see here, which has been adapted from various publications. They come from EUROCONTROL competencies. NATS uses a version of this as well. So it's a fairly well-known diagram of human performance. But there's a few things I want to point out which might be of some use to you. In fact, sometimes I even don't like to go further than this slide, because I think we could have a whole hour of discussion just on what this slide is showing us. But I'll rush through it very quickly, and you're welcome to look at it and talk to me about it at a later stage. So our goal as human factors, human performance specialists, but also I think as an aviation company, as an air navigation service provider, is to take a magic number, a mythical number of human performance, and use that to move aircraft through the sky safely. And our human performance consists of whole teams of people, engineers, ATCOs. For us at EUROCONTROL, we have meteorologists, all of the support staff, all of the infrastructure staff, even human resources, they're part of this team. If we take this magical number of human performance, we can work out actually how much of this number do we need to move the number of planes that we need to move. So for us, once we define and understand at a high level what success looks like, which is move planes safely, efficiently, then we can work out, well, how much human performance do we need to do this? And then we can crack open this star, this human performance, and actually begin to understand, well, what makes that human performance happen? And for me, I like to think of this in terms of 4 key layers, which you can see here. The absolute bottom layer, the bedrock of all companies, but also of all ANSPs, all aviation companies, is absolutely our culture. Now, as Lupe said in my introduction, I have come from the other side of the world. I have grown up in Asia. I have lived in the Netherlands and the UK and Austria. And you can probably begin to imagine that culture is a bit of another passion of mine that is following me around. Most organizational psychologists are able to actually pinpoint most of a company's problems back to its culture. And I could rattle off a whole number of incidents and accidents where culture has been an absolute part of the cause. In aviation, we tend to specifically talk about safety culture or just culture or organizational culture, but I actually think there is a lot of national culture at play. You know, I am privileged to be in an Austrian company in Vienna as a non-Austrian, and actually trying to understand what makes Austrians, what interests Austrians, and what worries Austrians is sometimes very different to my own perspective. So understanding culture and making sure that we have a shared belief and a shared set of behavior in what we're doing is crucial. And you'll note, by the way, we don't need individuals to think about culture. We are a collection here. As we move up to the next layer, which is our infrastructure layer, we are still without thinking of individuals. But this is where actually a lot of companies, a lot of organizations, I think over the years have begun to drift apart from where they probably thought they were or wanted to be in the first place. What do I mean by this? Let's start with the bottom left box. It says jobs, roles versus tasks. Well, we know what the tasks of an ATCO are, but have they changed perhaps in the last 30 years? I think many would say yes, they have changed considerably. But sometimes, on the other hand, they might not have changed at all. Some of the basic things have remained exactly the same. I would say that for ATCOs, we still understand really how to match a person to a task quite well. But are we so good at matching people and roles to tasks when we go further away from the ops room? What does it look like for our engineers? What does it look like for our support staff? Are we actually using our people efficiently and effectively? And there are many tools that you can do to test this and to rebuild this, and I won't go into them now, but it's really key that once you as a company have a set of tasks to do, you work out who and how you're going to do them. How do we do things? We use processes and tools. And as you can see in the next two boxes, it's crucial to get these things right to make sure that that anybody can do the jobs, whether it's person A or person B. We should be able to do these jobs almost independently of who they are. We have external factors on companies. COVID was a huge external factor and pressure on our companies, but there are many others, of course. A lot of us are in competitive businesses, and we are often trying to face the pressure of the economic market as well. And then the last area of infrastructure is around ergonomics and physical environment. And I honestly think one day I would like to write a book about all of the sort of funny or not so funny things that can go wrong when you forget to design nice ergonomics into your operations rooms or into your office buildings. Sometimes human performance stops because people can't reach the back of the desk, for example, or they can't reach the telephone to make a phone call. And we find these funny, except that real life accidents have happened because people can't reach the telephone to call and warn someone. So it's very important. Now you'll still note the first two bottom layers are without individuals. It's only once we get to the selection, recruitment, training, skills, and experience layer that we bring people in off the street, we give them training, and we start to talk about who they are and what they can do and what their skills are. Experience, and I'm missing a P, which means I'm not good at spell checking, so I'm lacking that experience apparently, is actually a function of time. And sometimes we forget so quickly. Once we give someone a license, we expect them to just be experienced, that actually experience really requires a huge number of novel situations. And we'll see that in just a minute when we carry on about what I'm talking about. Finally, we come to this individual and day-to-day variability layers. And you'll see I've put big circles saying COVID watch. That's because when we dive into some data in a minute, I'll show you why we were very concerned about this with especially around COVID. But these four boxes, and you might be wondering, why have I chosen these four boxes? Well, they are the statistically most important, according to research, areas that affect our individual day-to-day variability. Workload and cognitive drivers, which means what's going on in your head and how much pressure. Situational awareness, and this one is absolutely my favorite area of cognitive research because this is where all human error begins and ends. Teamwork, communication, and supervision. This is where TRM or CRM would come into it. And of course, confidence and resilience. So using this set of understanding of human performance, this is how I want to talk about human performance. And when I throw in terms like cognitive science, neuroscience, human factors, and all of the elements that make up human performance, I want you to just remember that for me and for EUROCONTROL, my goal is to reach a magic number of human performance in the best way that I can. What does that mean? If I need more human performance to drive more planes through the sky, but I don't have more people to do it, how can I improve that human performance without increasing the number of people, for example? Or if I've got too many people and I don't need as much human performance, what's going to happen to the human factors like skill fade, for example, if I'm not using them effectively? Which brings me to the next part as we carry on. So part one, I'm just going to briefly rush over the data because I want to get onto some of the newer data. About a year and a bit ago now, EUROCONTROL, like all the ANSPs in Europe were faced with a question from Eurocontrol, which is, what are the risks for our human operators when there is no air traffic? And this is a fantastic question, because we have actually built a system, an air traffic system, that is designed to run at full capacity. We have designed it to run, as you will recall from this mountain, we've designed it to run at full human performance with the best tweaking of all of these human factors that we can possibly get. And when you throw out some of these boxes which make up the human performance, what's going to happen? Well, at EUROCONTROL, we rushed and scrambled to propose a whole bunch of things. We looked at, and you'll forgive some of the smaller pictures, but you're welcome to ask me for them later. I put out a paper about the risk of skill degradation. I put out a paper about cell phone distraction and other use and other monotony drivers and how to avoid it. We got guidance from ICAO, and we looked at all the types of things, and we dreamt up all the types of things that could happen to our operators when the air traffic disappeared. As you can see here, from March to July 2019, the average number of flights in the en route sector and en route section in EUROCONTROL was much higher than COVID, but I know this is the same for most companies, so you're probably all familiar with this picture. What I wanted to do next was actually design some studies to look at, well, actually, what did happen when the air traffic disappeared? What did happen between March and July 2020 when air traffic was almost gone? And we actually, I've put together a large human factors assessment, looking at as many human factors, human performance metrics as I could. I looked at workload, I looked at self-rated performance, I looked at effort, I looked at frustration, I also looked at skill fade. And the very first and most important question to us at the time was, do we have to worry about people forgetting how to do their jobs? Most ATCOs told us there's no way we're going to forget how to do our jobs in just a month. But of course, none of us knew that it would be going on longer than a year, and in many places still going on. So our first safety concern was stop the skill fade, stop the monotony, and make sure people were actually able to continue operating to all of their abilities. And this is when we actually started to figure out that there was probably going to be some other stuff going on. Now, I often use the term technical skills versus non-technical skills. For human factors specialists, technical skills represent all the ones that we can teach you, as in terms of how to do your job, how to use a phone, how to use a radar screen, how to operate in your job. Those are technical skills. We talk about non-technical skills as being, sometimes they're called soft skills. I'm not a fan of this term personally, but non-technical skills would be all of those individual variability things, like how well you get on in a team, how good of a supervisor you are, how well you manage things, time management, confidence, resilience, adaptability, all those types of things. And as a result of our first set of human performance data from our ATCOs, we were able to determine that technical skills were not fading as fast as we thought they might. But we determined that something else was going on. We had, so I did surveys in July 2020, and then I did about 5 to 6 months of occurrence management observations, where I looked at what human factors things were coming in as far as from our occurrence reports. So we had occurrences where rusty skills were directly contributing factors. So being out of practice was beginning to show, but only after 6 months. And actually, the types of rusty skills that people were reporting were not so much forgetting how to drive the plane or drive or control aircraft, but actually forgetting procedures, forgetting how to do things boldly, forgetting how to communicate a bit better. And we'll come back to those in a second. Some examples: controllers returned away from periods of leave or reduced work. and they didn't get up to speed quickly on current procedures. So their brains told them they'd be fine, and they didn't quite pay enough attention to what had changed. We found monotony was not a problem, especially in small airports because of higher VFR traffic. I think this is similar across Europe. We found that monotony may be more of a problem for en route, but this issue has almost gone away completely because most of our traffic numbers have returned to a good level this year. Skill fade, though, had slightly occurred, but not the technical skills we're talking about. We are talking about the non-technical skills, and this is where I started to get my first real clues that the non-technical skills were fading faster than anything else we could account for. And these individual variabilities, which I've talked about, include confidence, resilience, motivation, and worry. And I'm sure everyone in this call today can think about how COVID has affected their mental health and their individual variability to do work, and can probably see themselves in at least one of those words. As 2021 has gone on, though, traffic has returned, especially over summer, and actually we've seen that the reduction in non-technical skills has caused even more problems, and I'm going to show you them in just a second. And this is what I'm talking about. So when traffic came back this year, what we found was that there was a lack of balance between the confidence, the number of novel situations people had to deal with, and including lots of newly qualified people who had not been tested yet. And this actually meant that there was more strain from less workload than there was in the past, a statistically significant increase in the number of losses of separation, and a statistically significant increase in the number of overloads from reduced based against the number of flights. What am I talking about? Well, what I mean is for the ATCOs, it can be found that the non-technical skill fade over the last year and a bit has directly contributed to a reduction in human performance. In other words, that magic number I talked about back at the start, which in the past could move so many planes an hour or a day, can now not move so many planes. And this is very crucial for us to know. Less workload has caused more incidents than usual. We've also detected that because this has now been an almost 2-year pandemic, the recently qualified people are not being exposed to enough of the novel situations required to build that experience, which I talked about. And you will recall, as I mentioned, when you don't have enough novel situations, you need those to basically make your mistakes in the simulator, of course, safely. But when you're learning, you need those novel situations to generate new solutions in your brains to create better decision making. So what I've been saying and what I've been arguing is that the non-technical skill fade is something we absolutely need to be all over as operators and as managers of human factors. And we actually expanded our data sets to include our engineers and our meteorologists because they also represent our large sections of our operations. And of course, you will all know that it's not just ATCOs who make safety, but everyone inside our system. In fact, we found that our engineers and our Met staff were even more affected by a reduction of non-technical skills. You'll see, for example, on the right, these two pie charts represent huge amounts of worry and anxiety in day-to-day work, and also fears and worries about continuation of lockdown. This one here, which says Zukunftsängste, means worry about the future and the existence of our industry. And you can see a huge percentage of our engineers were worried about their futures. You can see here on the left, all of the subjective human performance, including a very different picture from what we saw at the ATCOs, which you can see in the slides previously at a slightly later time. But I've actually got a better picture, which is this one. And this is where I've basically matched up all of the human factors, human performance metrics from our different operational departments to show you what the picture has looked like over the last year. Just one note, the ATCO red line was taken July 2020, so it's a little bit out of date now. The green and blue were taken this year in February and in May, so they are a lot more accurate. The MET and engineering data also shows us what has happened as a result of things like home office and remote working. So there were other factors on these other departments. Essentially, though, what we've got is that low workload for ATCOs did not mean low workload for anyone else, especially our engineers. So IES is the Austro Control Engineering Services. And you can see that during COVID, our engineers were extremely high in their workload. In fact, it suggested that a lot of the task loading had shifted across the company. And this is a crucial thing to know when thinking about the future of human performance, because for the last 10 plus years, human factor specialists have been warning about the moving of tasks and the moving of safety and performance related tasks away from ATCOs, not deliberately, but through the use of technology and systems and cloud-based services and all of these things. And when we think, okay, well, ATCOs are all right because their workload is manageable, and we forget that the engineers who are, for example, updating things in the night or making maintenance on hardware are at full workload, we forget very quickly how this can contribute actually to spiking ATCO's workload later on. If we look at the effort, it matches the workload, which is good because it means it shows us that the effort actually is a good indicator as well. But there's an interesting note here, which is that the ATCO picture shows us that even though workload was very low, ATCO still had to work a bit harder to maintain this low workload. This is a quite cool thing to capture. Most human factor specialists know about this. Most people know about it, but it's cool to see it actually in data. What it means is that it takes us a lot of effort to actually do nothing. It takes us a lot of effort to sit there and maintain or monitor systems without doing anything. Another crucial thing to remember when thinking about the future of human performance. Here's the human side of our data. For me, one of the absolute best indicators of a whole lot of human factors as far as the human side, and we're talking about culture, we're talking about safety culture, we're talking about confidence, resilience. One of the best indicators is actually self-rated performance. And it's in a kind of funny way because most people, when asked to self-rate their performance, if they are in a good mood and they are experienced and confident, they will rate themselves a lot higher than a normal distribution. What does this mean? This is normal. This is human behavior to say, yeah, I'm doing a good job. I'm working hard. And so we expect to see bias. We expect to see high levels of self-rated performance. And as you can see for the ATCOs and the engineers, this is the case. We see a large percentage of people reporting high self-rated performance and very high self-rated performance. What we see though for our MET department is slightly more troubling. And this was because our MET department underwent quite a few changes. They had to do their jobs in new and different ways. And this, as well as worry about the future of their department, meant that their confidence was beginning to slip. And we see this actually come through because when people begin to rate their performance as okay or not so good, or actually I could do better, it's a pre-warning, an alarm bell that something else might be going on to our people. Frustration is the last one, and I've just put it here to show that frustration is a very interesting indicator for human performance. We generally do expect to see a split, 30% not worried, 30% really, 30% not frustrated, 30% really frustrated, but it's the stuff in the middle that actually begins to show us a little bit more of a picture. And again, you can see the MET department was a bit more skewed and frustrated about their worry of the future. interestingly, and by the way, we collected feedback and comments on every one of these things, and we found that there were big themes: the media, the economic worry, the way governments were handling things. All of this was affecting our people. And if you want to ask me more about these reports, feel free to write to me or ask Lupe, and we can get a lot more of this data to you. So what does all of this mean? And I want to move on to the second part of my discussion this morning. We've spent the last year and a half essentially looking at a key question, which is what happens to an organization, to a safety system, when the driver of that safety system gets turned on its head. So what happened to human performance when there was no pressure or no main pressure on our system? And as I've said, the data has been quite overwhelming. We've found indicators across all of the human performance mountain that I showed you at the start. Everything has been tested because of COVID. From the way that jobs and roles are matched to people, we've uncovered, for example, lots of areas where there were tasks that people used to do, which are no longer there. They are now doing new tasks, which we didn't know about. We've found people who are still doing tasks that finished 20 years ago, and they should have moved on by now. We've found that even some of the ATCO and tower processes have not been maybe as good as they could have been, and all kinds of things like that. And this is just one box in that human factors mountain. As we've introduced new ways of working, like remote offices, home office, smaller teams, all these types of things, we've seen the technology, the procedures change, the processes, the HMI, Zoom, for example, all of this type of stuff. And this is now we've had an intake of trainees, and we've put them through simulators and given them licenses and qualifications. We've almost had a full cycle of the selection, recruiting, and training to look at as well. And when you combine this with the individual variability from the confidence, resilience, workload, situational awareness, all of those stuff, what it adds up to is that every one of those boxes in the human performance mountain has been tested in some way. And my conclusions have been the following. The answer to me seems quite obvious. And if I had many more hours, I could give you lots more examples, but you'll have to just take it from me right now. Returning to normal is not going to be so ideal for human performance. Change has already happened, and we will not go back. And this is interesting when we talk about flexibility or changes to how many home office days you have and all kinds of things like that. And so the conclusion is we must adjust using policy and strategy to capture the good that we've learned and improve on the bad. And I think the most overwhelming conclusion for me this year has been that we can no longer ignore the well-being of people. And most people individually and as teams and as managers, we don't ignore well-being naturally, but as a company or as an organization, we are often guilty of pretending that human beings can adapt to anything. This is a very human assumption to think, yeah, humans can do anything. And if we just bend them a little, push them a little, we can get through anything together. Sometimes this is called the Churchillian vision of the world, about from Churchill saying, you know, we can fight them in the beaches and we can do it everywhere. Well, actually, we've seen through COVID, and I don't just mean the medical side of the pandemic, I mean the mental health side, that humans cannot fight them on the beaches or continue to work in ways that push us beyond our limits. And so we must strive to rebuild our system and match workload against the talent and the mental health and well-being that we have. So that brings me to the blueprint for change, part 2 of our discussion. So I'm going to show you a little bit about what we've done at EUROCONTROL, and we've just, as of about 2 months ago, published our human factors and human performance strategy for the next 15 years. It's based around the CANSO standards of human performance, which most of you might have been aware of already. If not, they are from the CANSO Human Performance Working Group, and they are a set of blueprints of how to manage human performance. I've already given you a huge argument in the slide before about why we need a human performance roadmap, but there is even more to look at outside of just our organization. There are big questions to consider about the future of human factors and human performance, and now is the time to do it. As we return to normal, what can we do to think about some of these questions? Some conclusions we have already from CSAR and from all of the research: the human remains responsible. There's a big philosophical debate about when will AI take the responsibility away from humans, and I think 10 years is very, very generous. It will be probably a lot longer. But we do need to start thinking about how we license people, who is actually responsible. And this means we need some kind of idea of what we want to do. Automation complexity. The technology is here. We've made a digital picture of a black hole. But can we use this yet in our systems and in our services? And I'll show you an example in a minute about why we might want to be slightly more cautious about running towards some of this. Human performance complexity. Well, the more psychologists learn, the more complex our brains become. So the question is, where do we focus? Which topics matter most to us, and where do we invest our money? And this is where that metaphor of the black hole comes back. Is it just enough to illuminate the brain and what it's doing and know what pushes the brain and what the brain is going to put out? Or do we really need to know what's inside that black hole? Multidisciplinary. Well, a lot of companies, including us, we're not able to hire more people right now. We're not able to expand or hire experts that we need for specific issues, but we do have a lot of talent already in our company. So how can we bring those resources together better? Although I've just mentioned we can't hire specialists, there are more and more specialists who can contribute and give us good advice and help us out. So who do we need to do this in the future? A very crucial thing is that there are fewer incidents than ever before, which makes it harder to learn lessons. How do we continue to learn lessons from things? And on this note, I would ask everyone here to think about, how do we investigate things that are not in the ops room, even though we know they contribute to ops room success? You know, how do we investigate when a project goes wrong and is delayed and results in a loss of safety or a lack of performance or something like that? How do we investigate infrastructure problems or engineering problems? Do we have the same level of expertise to learn those lessons that we do for our ATM departments, for example? A lot of companies are also maturing now. They're getting experts like me and like Lupe to jump up and down about this stuff. But are we actually implementing what people are saying? Are we learning these lessons? And the final one is, where is your company going? Where is your organization going? EUROCONTROL has its own plans and its own dreams, and we wanted to fit our strategy for human performance into that. Which brings me to a very quick overview of what we're doing, just as a baseline for some of you. And I won't go through all of this because it's a bit wordy, but this one slide really does show our human performance strategy for the next 15 plus years. And there's a few key things I want to point out. As a company, we've done a lot of honest sort of learning about ourselves in the last 2-3 years, especially with COVID. And as I said, we have found that people sorry, actually, I will skip to this one. An assumption that our people will mold to solve any problem. This assumption I've just said needs to really go, because I don't think it's safe or good enough to say that people can do anything anymore. We've got lots of processes at EUROCONTROL that are quite good. We've got just culture, safety culture. We've got a change management department. We've got TRM, we've got CISM, but nothing is unified or designed, and nothing is monitored in quite the way that we think we could. We know as a company that people are important, but their roles are not always understood. As I've said, roles and matching them to people can be improved. And we have a a very nice new company strategy that does include modernization and defense against changing airspace, like drone users and things like this. But have we thought about how human performance actually comes into that? So in the next 5-6 years, we're going to try and unify all of this, and we're going to move to the middle, the top of this strategy, and we're going to look at how we can actually take some big steps forward in terms of this kind of management. And where we want to get to in the future is a symbiotic relationship between operator and automation. This is where the computer holds the hand of the person and vice versa. This is the kind of area that Cesar has taught us we're heading towards. We want fully automated monitoring of human performance, and we want to use it like a throttle. We want to know when our people are going to be working harder. We want to know when they are not working as hard, and when we can change sectorization because of this, and all those types of dreams. Very crucially, though, we want to sustain well-being against human performance, which means hiring people to do meaningful jobs, not hiring someone to sit in front of a computer and do absolutely nothing. I know most ATCOs would hate this idea. If you tried to tell an ATCO not to intervene on anything and to trust the computer to do it all for them, I think most of our ATCOs would probably go quite crazy. So in the future, we need to actually to understand where is that balance going to be, and how can we give people meaningful jobs to maintain their well-being, but also jump at that human performance pressure when we need it. And so all of this kind of strategy results in that center box, which is our vision. We want an operation and an organization. So this is not just our operators, but everyone inside the company, where human performance is proactively monitored and designed, resulting in a balance between the sustainable well-being of employees and the demand on their human performance from air traffic or other operational requirements. That balance is the absolute crucial part for me. We want to say that we are going to push our people to keep moving aircraft across the sky safely and efficiently. We will put pressure on people to get the most out of them. Actually, people like pressure on them, but we need to maintain this balance with well-being. And we're going to do it, as you can see in green at the bottom, using better capabilities in human performance, better design and building of human performance through technology, project management, and we're going to crucially look at the way we collect data and make informed decision-making. A lot of this should not be surprising to many of you. A lot of the world has been heading this way anyway. It's just about putting this into a human performance perspective. I'm going to run through a whole bunch of slides now just to give you some thoughts about some of the things I've talked about. You know, I've mentioned automation already, and one crucial thing is to think about how does the implementation of automation actually affect people. This little picture here in the middle actually shows that you can map an operation against the level of automation they have using the EUROCONTROL automation tables. And once you can work out how automated your system is, you can actually then work out, well, when I change this technology, what does that mean for the overall automation? What do I mean by all of this? Well, if you imagine that the mythical number of human performance X is able to be sustained by the current number of technologies and automation in your system, then you can imagine that is my baseline, that is my standard now. And any change to that standard is going to affect the human performance. You know that from the human performance triangle I've shown you. And so the question for safety experts and operators is, what will the change to that human performance be as a result of this new technology? And by mapping your organizations and your operations against these, the EUROCONTROL tables, I didn't put them in because they're a bit wordy, but feel free to ask about them later on. If you map your organization against these tables, you can work out where the journey is going to be. For example, if you bring in remote towers and centers, how does this really affect the overall safety? What happens when planes, or if planes can deconflict themselves and we just have ATCOs watching them? What will happen when everything is done through data link, if everything is done through data link, etc.? I'll give you an example of what I mean. At NATS, we did a very cool CSR experiment where we looked at Gatwick Airport. We talked about putting in a special alert into the systems using some artificial intelligence, which would tell ATCOs that an aircraft had done a level bust at takeoff. Now, I've put in a slightly confusing picture. This is just a picture of what the overall technology wanted to look like. For example, Gatwick Airport wants to use these things called tubes in the skies, where aircraft will fly with performance-based navigation systems, and they will be cleared to enter a PBN route and then basically come out the bottom of that PBN route ready to land or take off, for example, if they're doing it in reverse. And what we did actually to look at the level of automation change was to do a thought experiment with some ATCOs from Gatwick Airport. There is a standard instrument departure from Gatwick, which has aircraft level off 4 times. And this is because of Heathrow inbound outbounds and also Stansted and Luton inbound outbounds. The danger is, of course, if the aircraft doesn't level out when they're supposed to, they might stray into oncoming traffic. And so we asked the ATCOs, would you like a tool that tells you if an aircraft has done a level bust? And the ATCO said, yeah, that sounds interesting. So then we said, okay, well, if today, what is your baseline? Your baseline is 0 automation, right? You have to watch the plane and make sure it doesn't level bust. What happens if it does level bust? What's your solution? And they said, well, in a split second, we can look at the screen and know the best solution to handle this level bust. So we said, okay, well, now imagine you have a tool that tells you there's a level bust and gives you 10 options of solutions for you to choose from. And the ATCOs looked at us and said, but that induces more than 1 second of decision-making time. But theoretically, that is more automation than what they have today. If we take it further and we say, okay, well, now the system has determined a level bust and has worked out the best solution for you, and the ATCOs still look at me and go, yeah, but I still need to check if it's safe, and I still need to just determine if that actually solution is allowed, because I have the license and it's my choice, my decision. So again, more automation, more sophisticated coding, and yet still the same decision-making process. Let's go all the way now. Let's say that the system detects a level bust. It doesn't tell you, and it doesn't even give you a solution. It just sends it straight to the onboard flight management system, and neither you nor the pilot know that the system has done this. We would consider this full automation because the system has worked out a problem and told the plane how to fix it, and no human was involved. And the ATCOs look at us and say, well, you have to be crazy. That's beyond dangerous if I don't know what the planes are doing. And the story, the conclusion of the story really is that, well, more automation does not actually mean better decision. And if it does, what is the safety journey going to look like? And I love to tell the story because what it actually shows us is that the transition to automation could be more dangerous than the baseline we have today. In fact, I almost guarantee it will be more dangerous than the baseline we have today. And we need to know what that journey is going to look like. Moving on from automation, and I'll leave automation for now because I don't want to go too much into it. I want to talk a bit more about organizational roles, responsibilities, recruiting, maintaining skills. All of this stuff is from the bottom of the human performance triangle, and I've just put up the famous Swiss cheese model here just to show you that, you know, accidents happen not just at the individual ATCO, you know, level. They happen way, 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 way back at the organizational and cultural factors change. But often outside, we often forget though the middle stuff, the engineering, the procedures, and how can we, and I've talked about it already, how can we use our technologies rather than, for example, giving an ATCO full automation to determine a level bust? Why can't we use our AI to actually test procedures better or test the way we do engineering better? And I know we are, but why do we not think about this as being part of a safety chain? As a slight side note, for example, EUROCONTROL is about to launch a new Just Culture policy. The Just Culture policy is being expanded to cover the entire company, which means every single employee, whether you are an operator, an ATCO, or a human resources or a corporate staff member, will be held to the same level of standard in terms of decision makings against their competencies that everyone else has to be. And when I tried to do this, many people said to me, yeah, but how can you hold a lawyer or a project manager up to the same standard of an ATCO? And also, why do I, as a project manager, have to care about safety? And I think hopefully everyone in this meeting will roll their eyes and say, well, if you don't understand that your decisions contribute to safety in some way, then you're probably working in the wrong business. And I can make cases for how all of this works, but the key is that how will I get my ATCOs and engineers to trust me and my investigation teams if I don't also put the same standards on everyone else? And this is just a side note about organizational culture, just culture, and things like this. We can modernize and update and use the best lessons learning from all across the industries to try and do this in a better way. Human performance data, I've mentioned already, down in the bottom left, show all the subjective measures that we usually do. Things like all the questionnaires, the 1 to 5s, the instantaneous self-assessments, the ISA, so that when you push a button, we use slightly more sophisticated things like the NASA task load index. But all of these things are very cheap and not very valid. And in the last 10 years, there's been a lot of effort to look at how human performance data in real time can come from other areas like mouse clicks and keyboard strokes and voice analysis, and how can we use weather analysis and AI in terms of weather patterns to actually think about human performance. And this little graph shows you kind of where some of my interests also lie, which is all of this middle stuff. And we actually have built some programs now that can measure human performance or workload in real time. This picture at the bottom left with the blue colors, it shows 10 minutes of 14 workstations. And using mouse click data and speech recognition data alone, we were able to determine over 10 minutes who were the busiest controllers, and then use this information essentially to map out, yeah, who's under pressure, who's sitting back, who's doing nothing. There's 2 workstations that were not going, number 9 and 10, but you can see, for example, number 7 and 8, they were really busy in the first 2 minutes. And then they actually, if you saw the traffic, they actually handed over a lot of traffic to the other guys, number 5 and 6, who, as predicted, became a lot busier later on as well. This kind of human performance metrics in real time is where we want to go to in the future. And at EUROCONTROL, we're actually trying to now marry this up with lots of other data, things like complexity, metadata, and we want to be able to use that in real time to change sectors and do this kind of fluid human performance driver of our workload, rather than letting our workload determine our human performance. We have a lot better data for designing now. This picture here is quite an old picture. It's from NATS. It shows the statistically most used tools on an HMI. Using just data analysis, you can work out what tasks a controller is doing through technology, and actually then use that to influence how you design the next stuff. So for example, if we know that holding, in this case, is the most important thing for this particular sector, then we can make, for example, the holding button a big, gigantic button. And we can make, as you can see, speed non-conformances, so speed inputs, they're not done as often, so we could make that a smaller button. And you can use data to make your HMI designs better. And we can begin to do this. And finally, I've been just under an hour, which was great because we're coming to the last section. which is about the balance of mental health. Now, so far, I've rattled through evidence about what we've seen in the last year. I've argued that we need strategy and policy as well as real life solutions to the boxes in human performance. And I've shown you a little bit about what OstroControl is doing as far as our strategy, some of the tools, some of the things we're doing. Now I want to come to the final topic, which is about mental health in terms of human performance. And although I am a psychologist and I do lean, of course, towards human well-being as being the central topic, my job is also actually to make sure that we get the most out of people. And this could make me a very cold person. It could make me a very business-focused person instead. And this is often what happens to a lot of human factors. I'm not saying human factor specialists are cold by any means. What I'm saying is that when the business demands that we push more out of our people, and we have to make financial decisions based on the greatest good for the greatest number of people, which is how statistically choosing stuff works, often what suffers is the mental health of some people, whether that's one department, as we've seen, for example, at our MET department at OstroControl, or whether it's individuals. We need to make sure we are finding that balance. But I think this is not a new message to most of you. In fact, the rise of mental health, especially through COVID, has been a huge, huge topic. And you probably don't need to hear from someone like me about what it means and why it's so important. And here are a bunch of tips and tools and things like that. I could do it. We could have another lecture on that. But actually, what I wanted to ask was, why are we not listening to this advice so well? You know, there are some really, really cool tools out there. The Calm app, which I think was the app of the year in 2018. Headspace is another version of another company that does similar things. There are millions of these benefits posters and 10 ways to boost your mental health and all of these types of things. But as operators, I think sometimes we fall back on those assumptions that we are so well trained and so able to overcome everything that we actually think, well, that mental health stuff is not for us and not for me and not for my operation. It's good. There are some people who suffer, and we can send them away. But actually, I hope through some of the evidence I've shown you today that you realize that well-being really is not just something to ignore, but something that affects you day to day. And I'm going to show you a little bit more reason why, just to finish up. Human error is almost entirely consciously unavoidable. Okay, so up to 80% of human error is actually subconscious. You've learned this earlier in the week, I think. The remaining 19.9% is actually to do with conscious planning mistakes. And sorry, I skipped ahead of Skype. What I usually say is that even those conscious planning mistakes aren't normally done in a bad way. You're not trying to make a mistake or an error. You just make the best decision you can with the information you have. This stretches back, of course, to things like I mentioned, young controllers who haven't seen enough novel situations. But what I want to argue actually as we go on is that non-technical skills, which is the mental health stuff we're talking about, so confidence, resilience, adaptiveness, are actually absolutely crucial for reducing those human errors. Okay, and this is why. If you assume you have the right level of technical skills, your success is directly modulated by your non-technical skills. Okay, and I'm not going to go into how neuroscience works too much, but I just want to point out one key thing. We know that humans are, no matter how brilliant you are, humans are all trying to do the same thing, which is to stay alive. And our brains really are a giant threat detector. The key is that the brain is trying to determine what is a threat and what is not a threat. And when we successfully overcome things like we make a good decision, or we fight off the lion on the savannah, or we overcome a stressful situation at work, they are basically the same thing in terms of the brain. Our brain learns these successes and they actually file them away for later. But what happens when you constantly get set down and set back? Your brain begins to learn these negative emotions, negative memories, and then your brain begins to think, well, actually, I can't overcome this threat anymore. And when we combine this with what we know about how much energy a brain uses, and I've put this slide in because I always love to remind people that our brain uses the most energy of our entire body. We only have 2% of our body weight as our brain, but it uses up to 40% of our energy. And so it costs us so much to think. When we consider that brains use so much energy and are at risk of learning negative downward spiral type memories, as soon as we come under stress and we start running out of energy because of fatigue, or because of workload, or because of too much to do, for example, our brain begins to shut down and then fall back on how well we build our situational awareness. I always put this picture in because what I like to do is to prove to people that with just one picture, their situational awareness, we can show you how well your situational awareness really is. Most people looking at this picture would probably say the guy's drunk, or the guy's maybe passed out or asleep or something. And then I would say, which country is it? And people would know, oh, it must be England because of the police person's uniform. I would say, is this a man or a woman? Some people might say it's a woman because of her hat. Some people might say, we know it's London because of the area code, etc., etc. All of this information from one picture is what your brain is doing in terms of holding a situational awareness. But once your resources start to go, as your brain begins to shut down because of fatigue or workload, your brain then falls into, sorry, I'm just going to skip ahead, falls into these biases, which you must have seen or heard about this week. And when we fall into biases, we begin to make errors because the biases can only be right so many times before they actually start to make to go wrong. And this brings me all the way back to like, well, what am I rambling on about right here at the end? Well, I think that operators, and I know I was one for many years, I think we are often so well trained that we block out this mental health stuff, and we think, okay, it can't possibly affect me because my training will save me and my technology will save me. But actually, I think it's about time that we end this kind of assumption. We know so much now about how the brain actually does things that we can begin to overcome this. So human performance, especially confidence and resilience or well-being, increases when we break the negative learn cycles. So that's our monkey threat brains learning things wrong. When we make mistakes and we learn from them, and when we are aware of our limitations, and when we dare to try new things. And all of this together represents to me that balance of well-being, because we actually need to consciously take all of that to make it unconscious. And you're welcome to write to me if you want to hear lots more about this. But what I want to do is just summarize. I'm going to go right to the end because I'm just out of time, which is perfect. I've done a huge rattling through of themes and topics today, and I hope I've stimulated some ideas in some areas that you might want to learn more about or think more about. I started by showing you the human performance mountain. I showed you that there are 4 layers, and that COVID and the last 2 years in our industry has really tested every one of those boxes. I've shown you, especially at EUROCONTROL, but I know in other companies, that confidence and resilience has been down. So well-being has really been under threat. I've shown you that we've already changed the way we work. So no matter what we say, about returning to normal, there really is no returning to normal, because we already are not normal anymore. So the normal has changed. If we can capture all of this good stuff, we can put it into strategy and policy. And I hope that you are now thinking about how do or how do we do as a company human performance and human factors. And that way we can prepare for more changes and get more benefit out of it. We know neuroscience and cognitive science has shown us why confidence and resilience must be a focus. And there are so many tools that you can use now, like Calm and Headspace and all of these things, to improve that. But somehow we need to continue to marry up the importance. There are many ways to hack our brains. Just by being aware of it is the first best step. And the very last thing I want to end on is that through all of this data, through all of this research, I want to try and put a number on it. In the last year and a bit, we've basically seen at EUROCONTROL about 6 to 7% of our incidences have been directly related to this confidence and resilience aspect, to the mental health and well-being aspect. And that's just in ATM, and that's just in the stuff we can measure. If we expand that out to look at our other departments, engineering, meteorologists, and also the corporate environment, and we factor in all the new ways of working like home office and remote teams and things like this, we really do see that well-being is that haunting pressure that we need to think about. And I think the final thought really to add to this is that we often talk about the threat to the natural resources of the world. Climate change is a huge topic, and we know that the world and global economics runs on these natural resources. But the other resource that global economics runs on is a human resource. And if we don't actually be honest about how much pressure we're put on these human resources, then we are going to be at risk of also having not just a climate crisis, but a mental health crisis. In fact, many people would say we are already there. And so I hope you can see my story today has taken you from that COVID evidence, that COVID research, through the idea that we can strategize and policy build using everything we possibly know from all our disciplines. And we can try and get to a future where human performance is not just an important driver, but is one of the most important, right up there next to safety and system performance. And the way we can do that is to balance well-being against all of the other wonderful things that we are able to do as people. And I'm going to conclude there and hand back to Lupe, because I have no idea if anyone's still listening to me, because the Zoom...
Yes, Nathan, we
Wonderful.
were listening to you. We couldn't even speak a word. Everyone was like, I'm sure. Thank you for this high-level and practical presentation, human performance at the same time. It's fantastic. We have some questions that I'm going to present to you, so we can all continue the group discussion. But before we go to the question panel, we have already some questions. I would like to talk to you because this whole week we have been talking about human capabilities and limitations from a systems perspective, from a new, let's say, way to see the world. We have mentioned also in the stress presentation, it was in Spanish though, so maybe not for everyone, but we said that there's a connection between the brain and the performance. So, but honestly, I still see research and articles and a lot of information about trying to improve the human, if you know what I mean, trying to make people do something better. So, you know, trying to erase human error from the earth. And that apparently is going to improve systems, aviation, and safety. Could you, as the big expert that you are in human performance, comment on that, so I don't need to say anything else about this topic?
There's a very, very famous Greek myth about Procrusteus, And Procrusteus was used to try and fit his torture victims onto a table, and the table was the same shape. And so he would chop off limbs to make the people fit on this table. And we talk about this idea of Procrustean thinking in psychology, which is trying to make people fit to something almost never works. You have to try and make something fit to people. And the way we usually do this, as I said, is the greatest good for the greatest number of people. But I would argue that ultimately we haven't been getting that greatest good very, very correct, especially in the last 10, 20 years. We could do much better, is what I would love to say, to make the system fit to people, which is why I really stress the culture and infrastructure layer needs to be right to get human performance right. People will bend and break and bend and stretch and be flexible, but COVID shows us that it doesn't take very much to make them break. And so that Procrustean thinking is I think the best example here. Humans do not fit everything. We can fit it to people better. That's my thinking. Yeah.
So if we cannot fit everything, we cannot solve everything. We are not the component to blame all the time in the system. There's still this view, you know, going on. Yeah. I still keep reading articles on that. Anyway, Jade, we have some questions regarding your contacts. So I don't want to answer that without you. So if you would like to leave your contact in the chat, or if you want me to do it, I can do it for you. It's up to you, Nathan. I was not sure, so I don't want to do it without your permission. And now we go to the questions. Don't go, because Nathan is going to answer your questions. We have 3 main questions, different ones. So we're going to start with the first one by David Cabido, Spanish air traffic controllers from Barcelona ACC. And he said, hello, Nathan. I was wondering if EUROCONTROL implemented a recovery plan to help ATCOs, air traffic controllers, to get back to work with normal levels of traffic after the COVID stall. Which were, if so, the specific actions taken?
Yeah, we did. We had a pretty, actually slightly late recovery plan, because I think we predicted that there would be a return in this summer to traffic, but I think even we didn't expect it to bounce back quite so strongly. So we thought we had a little more time. However, so we did have a recovery plan. It very much kicked into action around April, May this year. Once we could get our simulators back up and running full time with all of the COVID measures, we had ATCOs in and out of that doing all kinds of ramp up to higher levels, especially for the big airports and the en route section. It was important to test them with high level traffic situations. So yeah, you could consider them kind of truce days, but done on a lot more rapidly. However, one interesting thing that did happen was that a lot of airlines have changed their schedules, and some airlines have dropped a lot of flights, others have increased flights, especially, for example, the budget airlines who like to take the super early morning slots and the super late in the evening slots. And this actually led to something we didn't predict, which was a quite a big change in the normal day of traffic pattern, both at the main airports and en route. And we couldn't actually prepare for this. So when normal levels came back, they came back, sure, but they came back actually in different time slots. And this affected all kinds of things, like when our watch handovers happen, and when we had more staff available and less staff and things like that. So one thing that we learned very quickly was we needed to understand again what had changed. And so we tried to look quickly at, is there a big change? And we found, as I mentioned, a couple. Vienna International Airport begins its day a little bit earlier now because there is a bigger, earlier rush hour, for example. So it was important, yeah, not just to practice normal, but actually learn what the new normal looked like. I hope that answers your question. The short answer was yes. Some specific actions was simulator practice, increasing true states, and we have also a new human factors day for every single ATCO, where I talk about all the stuff I've just talked about, which is defending against basically complacency, defending against thinking that, okay, things are back to normal, so I'm the same ATCO, but I'm not the same ATCO. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Nathan. We've got more questions for you, so get ready. So our colleague Matt Riley, sorry if I don't pronounce it perfectly well, he said he congratulated you. Fascinating stuff, Nathan, thank you. And then he said, looking at your Gatwick level bus example, if the system can determine a recommended solution, but the controller takes too long to calculate if this is the best solution, why ask the controller? Why not let the system talk directly to the cockpit? This assumes that the system has a bigger picture of the current traffic situation than just the level bus, of course.
That's a fantastic question, and to be honest, I mean, I don't work at NATS anymore. I'm not part of that research project anymore. As I said or alluded to, the thought experiment was done actually for a bigger purpose, which was about the tubes in the sky solutions, so the PBN-based navigation solutions. I just made a faux pas. Sorry, the PBN routes. I mean, I think you could be correct. Why ask the controller? If a quicker solution needs to be done, then sometimes the automation is the the better question. And there are many engineers in Europe. I've spoken to some, and I won't name names or countries, but some who would say to me, yeah, if the technology is better than the people, then we should get rid of the people. I'll mention one example. There's some great research into speech recognition. The speech recognition is now so good in some areas that it makes fewer mistakes than humans do. And so if you can use speech recognition as a data input device, like a mouse or a keyboard, and it makes less mistakes than a human, so why wouldn't you use this instead of the human? In other words, the person just talks to the controller working position, and the CWP automatically updates the picture based on what the people are saying. Well, this could be a solution, and I don't disagree with you. My point really was the one that I think every project manager and every engineer forgets or overlooks, which is the transition. The transition is the key. And I only need to mention the 737 MAX to get this point through. When those two 737 planes behaved in the opposite way to how the pilots were trained to fly them, this is something that was clearly overlooked. And, you know, Boeing's solution was kind of not to train people. Well, I think it taught us we not only need to train people, we need to understand what's the knowledge gap, how do we get from technology A to technology X safely. So Matt, I don't disagree. I don't have an answer.
Well,
but when you decide, make sure that the transition is safe.
Fantastic. What a good headline. Make sure that the transition is safe. We've got the next question is from Anders Allerstrand. Fantastic, great ex-air traffic controls from Sweden, now an entrepreneur with a consultancy company. Hi, Anders, it's a pleasure to have you on board. You say CNR must be a focus, both build and competence. Why then is that not the focus?
Well, I mean, it's a sad but short answer. Historically, it costs too much money. You know, historically, when every single hour of an ATCO's basic training is calculated and put into a tiny box, things like confidence and resilience often get chopped. I am happy now that for example, TRM is becoming bigger and bigger competencies that Eurocontrol have given us. I'm waiting for it to be a requirement. And I think the unfortunate thing is that the human factors requirements for teaching ATCOs does say that all ATCOs should learn about this stuff. What it doesn't say is to what level they should learn it. And that's because the requirements for teaching human factors to ATCOs essentially was written, what, 10, 12 years ago, the last major update. That might be wrong, don't hold me to it. And confidence and resilience is something we've really only figured out how to teach properly in the last 5-6 years. And I think now we really should make sure that not only the basic courses have CNR components, but all of the TRM updates and the ongoing training also has CNR updates. One thing I want to do, or we're trying to do at Austrocontrol, is to retrospectively teach every ATCO and every engineer, every ATSEP at least, confidence and resilience. And the key is competence. I'm glad you mentioned competencies, because competence-based training, which is where you actually get people to physically stand up and practice a skill and not just watch a slideshow and tick a box, it can be taught. CNR can be taught those ways. And I think it should be done in a more real life environment. For example, there's no reason why you can't teach CNR and TRM in a simulator, in a pretend watch, where you as the instructor walk up to an ATCO, put your hands on their shoulders and say, right, from where you are sitting, who are you talking to? Where do you get information from? Who are you expecting to hear from next? What happens when your supervisor doesn't tell you that thing? How do you get that information? How do you feel about that? What is going on culturally? What is going on outside, inside, etc.? You can do all of those competencies in real life, in real time. And I would love to see us get to that kind of level of teaching. So CNR should be a focus. And I'm hoping eventually the requirements catch up with it. But sadly, until they do, most ANSPs won't teach that level unless they have a bit of extra money to do so. Or they do it retrospectively, like what I'm proposing, through TRM days, through human factors days. You know, I'm so happy that this week has been put on, for example, because we need more of these things. I hope that answers your question.
You always answer so well and so in detail. I love that. Before we go to the next question, let me bring you the chat to you, since you said that you might not have access. Our colleague Matt, really, about the level-based question, he said, thank you for your answer. Thanks for your answer to my question. I am a controller. I'm a controller, not an engineer. I agree with you on the transition issues. It is all possible and safe with tech, but proving it is safe is another issue. So yes, for you to have our colleagues comment. And then I've got another comment for you from Mats Tonvan. Again, excuse my pronunciation. Thanks for a fantastic presentation. And I really like your view on humans in the systems change, automation versus humans and so on. Really inspiring and helpful for the future. So have a nice Friday and weekend. And I think it's a very nice message for you to have if you didn't get the chat. And then the last question, unless there is a very last question, we have a question from Fran, who is a member of my team, by the way, from the Spanish Human Factors Department, excellent investigator and also an engineer. And he said, well, Nathan, excellent presentation. Thank you very much. I would like to ask you a question. Are there any findings from the research or study that you have done in Austrocontrol that you find particularly unexpected? Here it goes, you know? Here it goes. Plan is always putting...
I would love to say yes, you know. Unfortunately, as sometimes happens, we often predict all of this stuff only to then go and confirm that it happened, and almost I think,
Nathan,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Let me put the question in another way. Because since you are an expert, you might have an idea what you are going to find.
I see.
In a way that, do you think your managers like will be surprised about the findings you got?
Yes, I see what you mean. I was going to say the percentage of confidence and resilience affecting incidents was very shocking. The speed at which well-being, confidence, resilience plummeted was quite shocking. I think the effect of home office, especially on engineers, was very, very surprising. And some of the, I would say, more funny but also not so funny effects of home office remote working was quite shocking. For example, very quickly individuals settled into their own kind of patterns of home office. But what was interesting was, especially in the engineering teams, you know, some people would like to work early in the morning, so they work hard from 8 till 12. But their manager might not log on till 11:30, and then work through the afternoon, and they miss each other. And this led to a 1 day of delay. But then the manager might say, well, you need to talk to this person. And again, that person was not online at the right. And so people started diverging away from being a team. And this happened quite quickly, and then led to breakdowns in intra-team communication, which had kind of big effects on the maintenance cycle, which then meant that the workload built up. And this was all because, you know, we didn't say you must be online from 9 till 12 or something like that. You know, so we were quite shocked to see, I think, some of those effects. But as I said, the well-being one, the non-technical skill degradation, it was quite surprising, even to me, who predicted it, but actually found it that strong, was quite surprising.
Do we have more questions? No, do we have?
Anders had a follow-up question. He said, "Do you mean the CNR is the cheaper replacement for competence?" No, I think you still need. I guess you mean. Do you mean the competencies of CNR or competencies in general? No, CNR doesn't replace competencies. I guess you mean if people are more confident or resilient, they can cover their lack of competence, I think is what you're asking. I would say I would never endorse that. You need to practice all competencies, and then confidence and resilience gives you higher quality of those competencies. But I think it needs to be hand in hand. You need confidence and resilience to work better, to perform better, and to learn better, and to get better at competency. So it's a circle, yeah. He says he means technical skills. I see. Is CNR a replacement for technical skills? No, but CNR is the difference between whether you do your technical skills well day to day, I think is what is the summary there. So you need the technical skills, but you will do them better if you have more awareness, more conscious awareness, and more practice of the resilience skills and the confidence skills. So you need both.
Nathan, maybe before we move to the next question from Jesus, I would like to share something. Not sure if you know the study. I haven't read it yet, but maybe I would like to share with our audience. There's an article, a study published in August this year in Nature Human Behavior, is the magazine, and it's titled "A Multi-Country Test of Reprisal Interventions on Emotions During the COVID-19 Pandemic." I'm going to write the link here at the chat. I haven't read it yet, but I think it could be really interesting in what you were mentioning before about, you know, well-being and COVID, and it has been performed in 87 countries, more than 20,000 people. So interesting to see what the findings are. So we put Jesus Garcia Hernandez. Would you like to go? Can you read his questions directly? Do you have Jesus? He said, "Thanks a lot, Nathan, for your very interesting and brilliant presentation. My question is, do you know I'm sure he does, but could you share bibliography references, or have you studied cases of incidents, accidents associated with human factors in ACSER or Alpha Echo Sierra, as you call them, and how does posture control incorporates lessons learned from these cases? Thanks.
Very good question. You might remember I mentioned how do companies investigate things that are not ATCO related. The reason I ask that is because it's a question we are asking ourselves a lot at the moment. We have an occurrence investigation team, a very cool bunch of investigators, and a very, very strong safety manager. But the process and policy procedures have always focused on ATCOs. Yes, we have the ability to expand that to engineers, but we don't have specific engineering investigators, for example. We don't have those kind of competencies. We have experts who we would call in to help us, but our investigators are investigating ATCO incidents. Why? Because the current requirements in Europe are to investigate incidences using the classification systems, and they are all targeted at the front line. I've been arguing, and a lot of people do for a long time, that we need to look, of course, across the whole system. And our investigators now, when they write their reports, are using some expanded tools. For example, our investigators also include what went right categories in their investigations, and often they will put in engineering saved us, or a tool was useful, or something like that. So we're trying to learn what went right. I'm dodging your question a little bit, I know, but the short answer is we are not so good at investigating engineering stuff yet. It's something we're working on. We do, however, learn lessons from engineering incidents, and we do have a major lesson learning database, and we can assign incidences and occurrences based on engineering issues. Of course we can. As I said, we don't have, I would like to see us have more competency for those types of things. Our human performance strategy actually makes provision for that. So in the future, we will use more data, use more system analysis and things like that. So we can do that. That's the part of your question about how we incorporate lessons learned. Do I have a bibliography of lessons just from posture control? No, but from Europe, there are quite a few now, I think, that you can go and look at. I think the better people to ask for that might be EUROCONTROL, who would have a big list of those engineering-based incidences. And perhaps we could ask Tony that question, Lupe, sometime.
Actually, my feeling, if I may, with your permission, Jesus, my feeling is that sometimes as providers, we kind of follow regulation. So sometimes the last years we have been driven by regulation. So as long as there's regulation which enforces or recommends to go in one particular way, then we put the accent and the effort on that. So I would say it's so important, your work, so important to safety. Sometimes it's not as known as the more visible front line operators, as I traffic controllers. For me, engineers are naturally also front line operators.
Oh, me too, yeah.
And what I would say is that it worked, I think, very good for pilots and controllers is when you lobby as a group, and you've got IFATSEA, which is a fantastic organization like IFALPA or IFATCA, and then you press and you go in the right places where decisions are made, and I'm talking about Europe, then you get a lot of compromise in the coming years. It's a long way, I know that, because I've been doing that for a while as a controller, and sometimes it's very tiring, but it works in the long run.
I just give one example. I know we've just gone slightly over, but last year we had a very a very funny, not funny, a very interesting incident over a number of months. There was a ghost target appearing on the ground radar at Vienna International Airport. So the tower controllers were being spoofed basically into thinking there was something there that wasn't. Now, this was an engineering issue relating to hardware and tech and software, but the reports were raised by ATCOs, so then investigated by the ATCO team. And if you take that perspective, you think, okay, well, what is the effect on the ATCO and the front line? Actually, what should have probably happened was an investigation, you know, from the opposite perspective, from the kind of system perspective. And eventually we got all of that, but we had to do almost a special kind of extra report on top of the incident reports and the occurrence reports, sorry. And the occurrence reports were ATCO driven, ATCO led, ATCO fronted. And I think it's going to be a question, at some point when things happen that don't even get to the ATCOs, how do we investigate that? When, you know, when the software makes decisions but nobody knows about it, how do we investigate that? And that could mean a new procedure, new requirements, new regulations, I think, yeah.
I think we don't have more questions from the audience. So
Perfect.
if you would like to just leave your closing statement, the headlines, some hope for the future.
I think there is hope. I want to say thanks very much for having me, Lupe. I think it was interesting they always say about climate change, for example, that it will be the people who actually raise up and change things and not the politicians. Well, I'm confident that the people will rise up, not just in aviation, but I think well-being is something we all learned about, whether consciously or not, in this last year. I know a lot of my colleagues here in Austria are sort of saying, why do I have to go back to the office 5 days a week at all? If you know, like I've learned to work and get my jobs done and I don't need to be at the office. I don't need to commute. This affects my mental health. I think people, and this is what I mean by change has already happened. I think people have been learning about well-being regardless of what I say. And I hope that everyone can take this forward collectively and not try and get back to normal in every way that normal used to be. That's my favorite, my closing line.
Thank you, Nathan. Brilliant mind, brilliant presentation. It has been an honor for us that you close this event. You are the biggest start, so we left you for the last day. And I just would like to say thank you for everyone, you know, to everyone for joining us, for the interest in human factors all over the world. We have people from America, Latin America, from Africa. We have today from Zambia and Morocco, for example. We have people all over Europe, people from Spain, from ENAIRE, of course, connecting, and a lot of frontline personnel, a lot of controllers, engineers, pilots, also, which is fantastic, and to have a multi-perspective audience. So we hope to repeat the ENAIRE Human Factor Days next year. Let's hope. And yes, from our side, thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So we'll be in touch, and please contact us if there's any issues. Find us also on LinkedIn and be in touch as colleagues and professionals. So thank you. Thank you to everyone.
Thanks, Lupe.